Hi, everyone. You're joining the July RDLA webinar. We just opened it up to participants, so we're just going to give everyone 1 minute for the system to get you all in, and then we'll get started. Hi, all. You're joining the RDLA July webinar. We're just going to give everyone 1 minute to get on. I see the numbers for participants climbing. All right. Well, welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. We have a really interesting panel of speakers for you all today. We're going to go ahead and get started. If you do need to call in, if your webinar audio isn't working properly, you can always have the option to just call in. So there is the number there. If you do have any questions for the speakers today, please type them in the Q&A box in the Zoom webinar, and myself or Caitlin will direct them to the speakers after they're done speaking. So today on our agenda, we have a panel of speakers to discuss the Prescription Drug User Fee Act 7. And Annie Kennedy with the Every Life Foundation for Rare Diseases is going to lead that discussion. And Danielle Friend with Bio, Eric Gasho with the National Health Council, and Christy, I should have asked you how to pronounce your last name before we started, with Barbara is joining us as well. And then we have Sloan Salzberg with the Council for Affordable Health Coverage to discuss a CMS proposal on value-based agreements. And Josh Mailman with NorCal CarCNet joining us on Medicare payment for advanced imaging. And I know all of you have heard a lot about Rare across America. So at the end, I'm just going to give you guys a few reminders about that. Annie, would you like to take it away?
I'd be happy to. So I'm just going to provide just a little bit of an overview and context about the Prescription Drug User Fee Act, what it is, why it exists. And then we have a really expert panel to provide a little more information about it through the different lenses of some of the stakeholders who really help reflect some of the needs of the community into the user fee negotiations. So just first, what is PDUFA? And as we know, we all love acronyms here in Washington. So PDUFA was first passed into law in 1992, and it's a law that helps to supplement FDA's resources through what are called user fees. And these are fees that are paid by the pharmaceutical industry companies. So these are not taxes that are paid by you and me and by Americans. These are sponsors, biopharmaceutical sponsors, pay these fees to help support critical resources at the FDA that addressed needs that were identified by stakeholders, including patient groups, industry partners, and others. And I'll talk in a moment about what some of those needs were and what the resources are that they provide. And the fees are paid at 2 different time points. One is there's an application fee, and that's paid when a therapeutic is in development. So either when the NDA or the BLA is submitted, and then there's a program fee. And so that's post-approval. So 2 different time points, the sponsor will pay a fee. And then in turn, FDA sets a target review timeline. And so many of us have heard the terms PDUFA dates. And oftentimes it's a term a lot of our rare disease patient communities focus on when there's a PDUFA date set for when we anticipate there's going to be an announcement around whether or not a product is approved. And that comes out of this, the Prescription Drug User Fee Act and what went into that law initially, and every time it's reauthorized. And that timeline is 10 months for a standard review and 6 months for a priority review. The next slide. So why PDUFA in the first place? Why in 1992? And why do we every 5 years go to the trouble to talk about it, look at what additional resources or infrastructure could be enhanced? So it was created as a way to really look at what the resource gaps were at the FDA and what additional capacity could be brought to bear within the agency. As many of us know, because we've been talking about additional ways to address bottlenecks at the agency, there were even more significant regulatory bottlenecks within the agency, and the review timelines were drastically different than they are now. So prior to PDUFA, more than 70% of new medications were first approved outside of the United States. So I just want people to pause and think about what that means for a moment. And on average, it took FDA 27 months to review a new drug. So if you think about the impact that that has on our rare disease community, if the review timeline was so long. And then by 2012, so the impact, the benefit of PDUFA, an average FDA review timeline was 13.3 months. And so I think it's important to know that the PDUFA date is a suggestion. So when on the previous slide I talked about those PDUFA timelines, that those are targets, those are aspirational, and FDA works really hard to meet those, but that's not a requirement. And so that really this, the PDUFA language and the PDUFA Act has really done a really great job of helping to bring additional resources into the agency, shorten those timelines, and on that last bullet point, you'll see that now more than 78% of medications are first approved in the United States, meaning it has incentivized therapy development and brought sponsors to conducting trials here in the US. So that's really important, and I expect maybe our partners from Bio and Pharma who are on with us today may talk about that. Okay, next slide. Okay, so PDUFA has been renewed 5 times, and I'm not going to take us through each of the iterations, although those who are on this panel may talk a little bit about highlights in each one. But we are now moving into the PDUFA 7 cycle, and we are right now living in PDUFA 6, if you will. So PDUFA 6 was passed in 2017, and many of us in the community were really a part of those discussions and the public workshops that FDA convened to understand what were the priorities of the patient community as they discussed what would be contained within PDUFA 6. PDUFA 6 expires on September 30th, 2022, and so those discussions around what will go into PDUFA 7 are starting now. And so what was really noteworthy within PDUFA 6 was this term that many of us now use very commonly, it's commonplace, it's PFDD, or patient-focused drug development. And again, that was baked into PDUFA 6, but before then, we never used that term. It actually was, for the first time, was used in PDUFA 6, and it's now codified as a part of FDA's mission. Also, real-world evidence and clinical trial innovations were very significant elements of PDUFA 6. Next slide. So the process, and again, I suspect our panelists will take us through, so this is again just for some context, but I think it's really important since I know many on this call today are members of the patient community. I think it's important that patient community members feel empowered to be a part of this process. So FDA Invite has already put out a call to non-industry stakeholders. So that includes advocacy groups, members of the patient community, healthcare professionals, anyone who's interested in participating in the PDUFA consultation meetings have to indicate their interest by August 17th. And that information is available on our website. So if you don't know where to find that, you can find it on FDA's website, but we've also made that information available on our website as to how to indicate your interest. The first public workshop, so FDA convenes public workshops as a part of the PDUFA discussions. The first one's being held next week, which is why we're talking about this today. And they have monthly periodic consultation meetings that go alongside their negotiations. And so that's, again, another really important part of the process. That said, there are key stakeholders that FDA sits down with and negotiates the PDUFA agreement with, and what yields from that is a commitment letter. And those stakeholders include trade associations and a representative from the patient community. And those trade associations and National Health Council are on with us today to talk more about the process and PDUFA through their lens. And I cannot underscore enough the importance of the role that those organizations play and our gratitude to those organizations for the work that they've done on behalf of our communities over the years. The next slide. So I'm going to hand it off first to Danielle Friend from BIO, who has been doing a lot of the work in this space for a very long time. I should say that BIO, National Health Council, and PhRMA have all been really tremendous partners of the RDLA Foundation and of our broader rare disease patient community. So again, thank you to all of you, and Danielle, over to you.
Great, thank you so much, Annie. First of all, I'd like to thank the Every Life Foundation and RDLA for setting up the webinar today and inviting me to participate. Next slide, please. So when I was thinking about my presentation and about PDUFA, excuse me, in general, one of the things that I was thinking about is that when I joined BIO in June of 2017, we were just at a point where PDUFA 6 was being kind of discussed a lot on the Hill and then passed into legislation in August of that year. And now we're coming to a point where we're thinking about the next round of PDUFA, and I can't help but make the comparison to kind of running a marathon. I think I'll try to highlight this through the rest of my slides. BIO has been thinking a lot about PDUFA 7 over quite some time. And so really we see it as a marathon and kind of having those conversations with stakeholders for a long period of time, even before we go into those discussions with FDA. Next slide, please. Thank you so much. So just want to highlight that, kind of connecting with my first slide, BIO has been having conversations not only with the companies that we represent, but also patient organizations, as Annie alluded to, really trying to gather ideas from stakeholders about challenges that we might want to address via PDUFA 7. We've been kind of collecting that information, kind of fine-tuning it, thinking about, what is rising to the top as far as priority, because, unfortunately, we can't bring everything to the table. As Annie mentioned, BIO and PhRMA work closely together when we go into the PDUFA negotiations, making sure we have kind of an aligned package on behalf of the industry. And we kind of aligned on our package in between February and May of this year. So general thoughts around kind of what we would be bringing forward. And then BIO in particular presented that to our board of directors for their approval in May of this year. And again, that package was made up of kind of all those conversations that we've had with our member companies and other stakeholders over the last at least 2 years or so. As Annie mentioned, kind of the first point where stakeholders can really start to share ideas with FDA is next week, July 23rd, where the FDA will be listening to stakeholders about ideas they have around PDUFA. Certainly encourage folks to kind of listen into that meeting and certainly provide their comments to FDA via the public docket that will be open through August. Then once we get to kind of the September timeframe, that's when negotiations will begin with the FDA. And as Annie mentioned, within the context of PDUFA, drug developers will agree to pay a certain fee to have their drug approved, and then certainly the program fees as well. And kind of in response, the FDA agrees to meet certain goal deadlines, but also kind of initiate key activities that might address some of the barriers that we see in the context of drug development and review. And that's really where kind of all these ideas and discussions with stakeholders kind of feeds into the development of those topics. And BIO and PhRMA will be bringing those forward for discussions with FDA in the fall. And those discussions with the FDA should last about until March of 2021, depending upon kind of what is brought forward. And at that point, that's when the PDUFA 7 performance goal letter will be developed and made public. Next slide. This slide just really kind of emphasizes kind of the key time points, the key timeline for PDUFA. I won't go over this in detail because I think I touched on a lot of these elements in my last slide, but just want to highlight again that next week will be one of the first key ways in which a wide range of stakeholders can share their thoughts with the FDA. And as Annie said, there is kind of a consultation process throughout the negotiations. I also want to mention that there will be another public meeting held next summer in order to, again, allow the FDA to hear from a wide range of stakeholders on their ideas regarding the PDUFA process, ideas for PDUFA, and certainly the commitment letter that's developed. Next slide. So I thought I would share with the audience today some key general topic areas that BIO will be bringing forward kind of on behalf of industry, and certainly kind of what we've heard from patient organizations as well. And I will mention that my boss, Carter Esham, will be speaking at the public meeting next week and adding a little bit more color commentary and what have you. So there will certainly be more information provided at that meeting, but I thought I would just highlight some topics in particular. So one of the topics that BIO would like to bring forward to the FDA is really around cell and gene therapies, and certainly CBER resourcing. We're starting to see kind of a wave of these new therapies being developed, and getting closer to a point where they're entering clinical trials and maybe even closer to approval. And we're recognizing that unless FDA is able to appropriately staff CBER, they won't be able to keep pace with the number of therapies that are in development. So one key thought that we're bringing forward is really making sure that the FDA is resourced in order to handle these new innovative therapies. One of the other topics we'll be bringing forward is around manufacturing and inspections. So manufacturing and quality play a really important role in the drug development process in order to ensure timely access to safe medicines. And we want to make sure that manufacturing and inspections are not kind of a stopgap in lengthening the time that it takes to deliver therapies to patients. Additionally, there are a lot of ideas around different innovative manufacturing processes, and we want to make sure those can be accepted and guidelines around those and so forth. So that is another topic. The third topic is focused on enhanced interactions between FDA and sponsors, and that's really making sure that there are opportunities for clear engagement throughout the drug development and review process, so that we can make sure we're bringing those therapies to patients as quickly, but as safely and certainly effectively as possible. The next topic is focused on advanced digital health technology tools. I think a lot of us have been aware of a lot of the advancements in the use of digital technologies in the context of drug development, and certainly just for treating patients on their own. And so one of these topics bringing forward is really making sure that we have clear guidelines for sponsors if they'd like to use some of these digital technology tools in their drug development. The next topic is leveraging information technology, and this is essentially making sure that the FDA is kind of up to speed with the technology they need in order to quickly and effectively review and handle data that comes into the agency. Certainly, kind of thinking about knowledge management and how they share information across the FDA. And then the last topic is focused on optimizing the new molecular entity review process. And this is essentially just trying to get at streamlining some activities in the context of review of therapies, making sure, again, that things are done in an efficient manner. So again, those are just a few highlights of some of the things that are of interest to BIO at the moment, and I think we've heard from other stakeholders about as well. Certainly, please tune in to the public meeting next week. As I said, Carter will provide some additional detail on some of our thoughts. So with that, I think I'll hand it back to Annie.
Thank you. Thanks, Danielle. That was fantastic. So next, we have Eric Gashko, who's going to take us through what the National Health Council's lens and role has been traditionally as they've worked on behalf of the patient community to engage in PDUFA.
Great. Thanks, Annie, and thanks, Shannon, for inviting me today. If we go to the next slide, just a quick note on the National Health Council for those of you who aren't familiar with us. We were founded in 1920 as a trade association for patient advocacy organizations. So we picked one heck of a year to celebrate our 100th anniversary. What makes us unique is in the 1960s, we opened up membership to a broad stakeholder community. So in membership currently, we have representatives from the provider, family caregiving, insurance, biopharmaceutical, device, diagnostic, really the entire healthcare ecosystem. And we work together to provide a united voice for people with chronic diseases and disabilities. We have the patient groups are still our core constituency who control our governments and policy-making process, but we hear from a wide range of perspectives as we work to advocate on Capitol Hill and with the administration. If we go to the next slide, want to talk a little bit about kind of what our priorities are for PDUFA 7, but first want to kind of level set on some of the recent successes that the patient community has had. And I'll say that you know, these things did not come by accident. If you take one thing away from this session today, it's the importance of engaging in the process. You know, starting with the public workshop next week and then participating in the regular stakeholder meetings are a really, really impactful way to ensure that the patient voice is heard in the process. And we've done it to great success in recent iterations and hope to do so in PDUFA 7 as well. And you know, at least next week and probably the next couple will be done virtually. So for those of you who may be on the West Coast or outside of the DC area, might be easier to participate this time around as well. Going back a few iterations to PDUFA 5, this was really the first time that we saw a whole host of regulatory science improvements added. I think FDA has done a really good job of working with industry since the beginning of PDUFA to speed up the timelines and have really, as we heard earlier, done a great job of getting new products onto the market through the program. But because they did such a great job of that, they were able to kind of allocate some resources to a lot of great improvements as well. Most notably, Annie mentioned the patient-focused drug development program. We think this is one of the most transformational initiatives we've ever seen out of the FDA, and know that there's good opportunities to keep moving that forward. If we go to the next slide, PDUFA 6, we saw a lot of iterations on top of PDUFA 5. So not only did they start with the PFDD meetings that I know a lot of people on the call have either hosted or participated in, but under the current PDUFA, they're also working to develop guidances for industry and other stakeholders to know how better to know how to better incorporate, capture and incorporate the patient perspective into their work. And you know, our goal is, and our hope is, that as they roll out the rest of the series of guidances, they just finalized the first one last month, and we'll be rolling out more over the next year or two. That once those guidances are done, it'll give a lot of important clarity for industry to know not only the importance of patient engagement to the agency, but also ways of really doing a better job of incorporating the patient voice. If we go to the next slide. So as we think about PDUFA 7, a lot of what we want to do is similar to how we saw PDUFA 5 go from the PFDD meetings to the guidances in 6. What are some of those next steps that can really help better incorporate the patient perspective into drug development and review? So if we go to the next slide, you heard from Danielle a bit on the use of digital tools. We had already seen industry really start to move in this direction, really as a way to decrease clinical trial participation burden and really enable them to reach a broader, more diverse and more representative patient population. We already saw this happening, but in the world of COVID, I think we've seen a huge expansion of it as well out of necessity. So there's a lot of learnings that have been coming over the last few years and certainly over the last few months on how we can better deploy digital tools such as wearables, trackables, things of that nature to be an input into the clinical trial process. The one thing that we're still kind of trying to learn a little bit more about is how can we do a better job. I think one area that we would like to see within the National Health Council is more of an effort to engage patients in the deployment of these tools. How can we make sure that they're done in a way that's least burdensome for patients and really helps industry capture the data that they need. So one thing that we would like to see in PDUFA 7 would be some sort of pilot program that helps fund industry to do patient engagement to learn how to better use these tools, and think that there will be an opportunity to then create more clarity from the FDA on how they can be used. If we go to the next slide. One of the really big parts of PDUFA is really ensuring that FDA has the resources that they need to hire and retain staff to help on all the initiatives that we're talking about. One particular area that we would like to see greater resources and some flexibility for FDA to hire folks would be on the point that Danielle made about more consistent communication with FDA and industry. And in particular, really along the lines of those that are developing their patient engagement strategies. Under the current system, in most cases, industry has one meeting that they get before they submit their applications, that they have to capture a whole host of issues to make sure that they and FDA are on the same page. And their patient engagement plan has to, out of necessity, become a small part of that. We would like to see a lot more frequent and robust communications and conversations between the agency and sponsors to ensure that their patient engagement plans are going to be something that are going to lead to information that's going to be usable by FDA. One of my greatest fears, although we have a lot of hope with PFDD, one of my greatest fears that we'll see certain companies devote a lot of resources to their PFDD efforts. They submit the information to FDA. It isn't used in any meaningful way because it's not quite what they were looking for. And then a lot of other companies get wind and say, okay, is this really worth the time and effort and money to do this? So we really think, particularly as the science is evolving, that we need to make sure that we get this right. I think one of the better ways to do that is ensure that FDA has the staff and expertise to be able to have frequent communications with industry. If we go to the next slide. So one other area we like to see, and this kind of relates to, I know, a lot of work that Annie has done in her previous and current role on the Statement of Patient Experience, which is a template that industry sponsors, that the reviewers will say how and whether they used patient experience data that was submitted by the agency. One thing that's happening right now is that FDA is rolling out a knowledge management system, which is a computer system that essentially allows reviewers to tap into prior review decisions to see how the FDA previously incorporated information. We really want to make sure that the patient experience data is incorporated into this. So if a reviewer is trying to look to see how they should handle any patient information that's been submitted, they can pull previous decisions to see how that was done, and will really create some efficiencies and ensure that the patient perspective is included in their decisions. If we go to the next slide, we talked a little bit about real world evidence. We've seen a lot of work move in that direction over the previous PDUFA iterations. One thing we like to see is that work continue. And really want to see this done in a way that involves the patient perspective and the deployment. We think, again, some sort of pilot program that would include patient engagement in RWE design would be incredibly helpful. Go to the next slide. So last but certainly not least, one area that we've been really focusing a lot on are on core outcome sets. If we go to the next slide, and I will not walk us through this entire busy slide, but tune in next week. Mark will be kind of walking through it a little bit more. So core outcome sets are sets of measures that a whole host of stakeholders can use. What we currently see is really a lot of these kind of done today. They can be done in silos. We have seen areas where they're done in more of a collaborative consortia like activities. FDA is actually currently funding a few areas for multi-stakeholders to collaborate and decide what are the outcomes that matter to patients that can be included in core outcome sets. One thing we would really like to see in an expansion of this is really taking an earlier, closer look at what are the evidentiary needs from a variety of stakeholders. So a lot of these outcomes that matter to patients, such as their impact on symptoms, their physical status, mental status, et cetera, really are consistent across the board in terms of how they impact patients and how they should be used in the health ecosystem. So we think that any sort of pilot program should ensure that we're really thinking across the pipeline on this and bringing in some of those folks who need this information as well. So when you think about payers, value assessors, a lot of these groups that need evidence to do their work, and for any of you that have participated in a value assessment, you know that it can be a lot of work to try to help collect some of that data. Our thinking is that these things should be done much earlier on in the process. So if at the very front end of research, we're thinking about what are the outcomes that matter to patients and how can that evidence be collected in a way that will be useful across multiple uses, we think we'll create some efficiency and really relieve a lot of the burden on patients. So I think that's it, and I will turn it back over and certainly happy to answer any questions that folks may have.
Thank you, Eric. That's all phenomenal. Thank you. And I hope that a lot of the folks in the patient community who are listening to these presentations are seeing a lot of the priorities of the community reflected in these presentations. And if you have questions or there are priorities that you're not seeing reflected, please reach out to us so that we can make sure that they are. And I saw Caitlin also post the link to register for the meeting next week. And so we encourage you to also do that and be a part of the meeting. So next, we have another key stakeholder who's a part of the process and the trade through the trade associations, and that's pharma. And so Christy, thank you for being on with us today. So I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Christy Lupakis, and I work at Pharma in the Science and Advocacy Department, the Pharmaceutical Research and Manufacturers of America. We're a trade association representing innovative biopharmaceutical companies. So thank you for having me. I know Annie addressed the overview of PDUFA at the beginning, but I just want to begin by highlighting the fact that PDUFA is really a testament to the patient advocacy group's power to affect change. In the 1980s, the AIDS crisis prompted activists to protest because of the lack of treatments available for HIV/AIDS, going so far as to have folks chain themselves to the front door of the FDA building at the time. As Annie highlighted, FDA's drug approval process was slow, and that was in part because of a lack of available resources. So the agency didn't have enough supportive review staff and enough supportive resources to enable drug review. So once that happened, these efforts helped the FDA, Congress, and industry come together and say, what can we do about this? How do we affect change here? What can be done that will be meaningful, that will really impact the Human Drug Review Program and make a difference for patients who are suffering? So next slide, please. So in brief, as discussed before, PDUFA was enacted in 1992 as a bipartisan solution to increase the efficiency of prescription drug review at FDA. And I want to highlight the fact, especially in the current political environment, that PDUFA has consistently had bipartisan political support. It's been a successful program, and congressional folks on both sides of the aisle and all stakeholders have recognized the value that it brings to patients and the stakeholder community writ large. So as Annie said, PDUFA allowed the FDA to collect user fees from the biopharmaceutical industry and apply them to enhance human drug review. In return, FDA and the industry negotiate performance goals during each reauthorization cycle. So the goals letter contains commitments related to new drug applications, biologics license applications, drug safety, and the drug development process. And as a result of the PDUFA program and the NME review model implemented under PDUFA 5, the FDA Human Drug Review Program is the global gold standard for efficiency. So I have here that we currently have 8 months for a priority review, NME, NDA, BLA, and 12 months for a standard review. And I know Annie said 6 months and 10 months. That is true. Part of the PDUFA 5 program was that in order to help better allow FDA to be prepared for a drug review, there's a 2-month clock where an application is submitted. The FDA gets 2 months basically before the PDUFA clock starts, and then that 6 and 10 month clock starts. So I want to highlight here again. Annie said PDUFA has been authorized 5 times since inception. And similar to what Danielle said, we've been running a parallel process at Pharma to try to elucidate what we want the goals letter to look like. We get, similar to what Bio does, we have stakeholder discussions. We work with our own membership. It is a lengthy process. It is coming up on 2 years, but we recognize the value and the importance of having stakeholder input in this and really using this as a powerful tool to enhance drug development and increase access to critical medicines. And we also see this at Pharma as we see the PDUFAs as kind of seamless in terms of we move from a PDUFA implementation cycle to a reauthorization cycle to an implementation cycle, because we want to make sure that instead of coming together every time there's reauthorization with FDA and trying to come together and maybe deal with issues or challenges or opportunities, we want to make sure we're having this robust engagement and conversation as we're going through a PDUFA cycle, so that we can address things that need to be addressed, so that we can look to engage on enhancements, but really make sure that we are working together as collaborative partners with the agency to ensure the best possible outcomes based on what's in the goals letter. Next slide, please. So I recognize that this has small text, but I promise I won't go through it all, as Eric said, and I also promise that it really helps illustrate the point that the scope of activities FDA must undertake as part of PDUFA has grown exponentially. So each authorization, there's been additional, obviously, enhancements. It now includes commitments beyond the original performance goals, as you're aware, such as enhancements designed to give sponsors clarity and guidance on an array of regulatory science considerations and new review program initiatives. Eric touched on many of these in PDUFA 5 and then within PDUFA 6. Some of these also include the Breakthrough Therapies Program, drug safety and pharmacovigilance, and as was touched on before, drug development tools such as biomarkers, patient-reported outcomes, patient-focused drug development program, et cetera. So saying that each successive PDUFA builds on the last underscores the fact that we really need a well-funded, well-staffed FDA. It's critical to the success of the Human Drug Review Program, and there's quite a bit here of value, and we have to make sure that FDA has the appropriate resources and the access to expertise that it needs in order to fulfill its obligations under the program and to patients as well, and its public health mission. So as mentioned before, PDUFA 6 included a variety of capacity planning, hiring, recruitment, and retention goals designed to ensure FDA had and, as I said, to expertise to fulfill their commitments. And we anticipate building upon these goals at 6 and during 6, because as I mentioned before, we really want to use these successive PDUFAs to build upon the last to provide the most value to patients and to sponsors. So we will move forward to try to look at how the enhancements worked in PDUFA 6 and what we can do in PDUFA 7 to enhance the enhancements, so to say, to the resourcing program. We also want to build upon other areas to enhance the use of innovative drug development approaches. And some of these were mentioned before, but such as enhancing the clinical trial enterprise, things such as complex innovative clinical trial designs, adaptive clinical trial designs, the use of innovative statistical models such as Bayesian models, and increasing the use of real-world data, real-world evidence in regulatory decision-making, which has also been touched on earlier. But we really, again, want to build on the good work that's come before, since these types of tools have the potential to reduce the time needed to bring new therapies to market and get more timely patient access to treatments to address unmet medical need. We also want to build on the good work done in previous PDUFAs in the patient-focused drug development space to ensure that those valuable insights that physicians, caregivers, and patients can bring about treatments is captured appropriately. We also want to make sure, as mentioned before, that any drug development or regulatory efficiencies or lessons learned from sponsor FDA engagement in the development of COVID-19 therapies and vaccines are captured. FDA has done a phenomenal job in being obviously at the forefront of the response here. They've issued guidance documents to give clarity to sponsors. You may have seen communications that are coming out from Commissioner Hahn and FDA in terms of really trying to drive remedies to crisis. We want to take any kind of efficiencies that we find, as mentioned before, that come about through this engagement on the pandemic and use them to enhance the Human Drug Review Program as appropriate beyond the development of treatments for the pandemic. So as mentioned before, the digital, in terms of digital health, the digital clinical trial or digital tools to address clinical trials, things that we can do, things that we can take from what's going on now in terms of sponsor engagement, virtual meetings with the FDA, how can we apply those going forward to the Human Drug Review Program to really enhance it beyond pandemic response. And as my colleague Danielle mentioned before, we also want to increase regulatory clarity around the use of digital health technologies, including the use of artificial intelligence, machine learning. We want to ensure that FDA's IT infrastructure is able to accept, for example, large data sets that might come with the use of real world evidence or real world data. And we also want to make sure that while PDUFA is an incredibly critical program, we want to make sure that we use all the opportunities available to us and leverage them when it comes to advancing the science of drug development and regulatory decision making. So PDUFA 6 and the first 21st Century Cures Act have successfully worked in tandem to enhance FDA's Human Drug Review Program on issues such as the use of real world evidence, regenerative medicine, cell and gene therapies, and patient preference data. And with Cures 2.0 now working its way through Congress, we want to make sure that we leverage that opportunity in the same way to enhance the great work that's happening within the PDUFAs, to enhance the work that happened in previous cures, and make sure that progress happens in the areas that have already been addressed, but have that also be informed by new areas of innovative approaches to drug development and regulatory review. And I'll end by saying, as Danielle discussed, my supervisor, Lucy Vershagana, will be speaking next week at the July 23rd public meeting on PDUFA. So there'll be additional detail provided on what I had covered, and so beyond what I've covered today, but really digging into what we are looking for in terms of PDUFA 7. So I encourage all of you, as others have, to please try to attend it. We really value your insights, we value participation, and as I started with in the presentation, it really can make a meaningful impact. So thank you very much. I'll turn this back over to Annie.
Thank you, everybody. So thank you. This was really fantastic. And I will say just a couple things. The first is that we will do some other webinars about these topics as the PDUFA discussions evolve, because we're just at the beginning of the PDUFA 7 journey or marathon, as Danielle said, which I like that description. The other thing is there are parallel processes underway for medical devices and biosimilars. So we were really just focusing on the prescription drug user fees today. The other thing is, I know there was a lot of information here, but what I hope people feel and see, and that the takeaway is that this is very much a community empowered process. And you can see from, I think, the graphic actually that Christy provided, there's been this evolution and this building of the process, and much of that's because of the engagement of the patient community. And as everybody sort of outlined the priorities, you can really see, I'm struck by a lot of what's in these blue and purple boxes are priorities that we've heard from the patient community, especially starting in PDUFA 4, 5, and then 6. You've seen this building engagement from the patient community organizations and partners who have been very much a present force of engagement within these discussions. So our hope would be that will only increase within PDUFA 7. And I think it's fair to say that FDA would probably want to see that happen as well, because of this evolving increased focus on patient-focused drug development. So thank you everyone who was a part of this panel today. And to the panelists today, thank you for ensuring that the priorities that you were reflecting into the process are a direct reflection of what we are bringing to you. So thank you. So with that, I'm going to hand it back to Shannon.
Great, thank you so much. We did have one question. I don't know if either of our speakers want to address it, but someone asked about the impact of these review timelines on a COVID vaccine. Do any of our speakers feel equipped to answer that question? Yeah, and now on Monday we'll have another All right.
No, so I would say, Shannon, I would just say, I don't know, everyone may have gone on mute, but I would say that the existence of PDUFA will be beneficial for any products that are brought forward specific to COVID. So this infrastructure will only be of benefit for what's happening in the context here in the US.
Great.
And
Thank you,
Annie, this is Danielle. I'll just add that I know there's a lot of flexibility at the agency right now. They are trying to, speed timelines for COVID-related therapies. So I think there's a lot of support there for, getting vaccines and other treatments and cures to patients as quickly as possible.
And Andy, this is Christy. I would also like to say that Commissioner Hahn has come out and said that the FDA is supportive of taking those lessons learned that they're doing, or the process, and having them go forward into the Human Drug Review Enterprise beyond as appropriate. So it seems like there's there's a lot of momentum here on this.
Yeah, and Chris, you were breaking up just a little bit, but so I just want to make sure everyone got that the FDA commissioner has committed to whatever our lessons learned are within COVID, within the trials being exercised now within COVID, but also what we're learning as we adapt the existing clinical trials during the pandemic, that those good practices and best practices will then be captured so that we can make sure they're implemented beyond the public health emergency. So I just wanted to make sure we captured that for the webinar.
Wonderful. Thank you all. All right. Well, I think we're actually running, we're okay on time, but Sloan, I want to pass it off to you.
Great. Thanks, all. So, I think the previous speakers were on a 2-year timeline. I'm on a 5-day timeline. So folks, just to kind of level set, CMS, the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, put out a proposed rule earlier in June that included a lot of things in it, but specific in the proposed rule is something that I know the Every Life Foundation and RDLA and my organizations, the Council for Affordable Health Coverage and Campaign for Transformative Therapies, really care about, which is kind of some things to flex up and encourage more value-based arrangements with medications in both the federal and public sectors. So you can go to the next slide. So I'm just going to do a really quick overview of what's in the rule and then drill down. I'd like to start it off because CMS is so great at titling their rules. So the title of the proposed rule is the Medicaid program establishing minimum standards in Medicaid state drug utilization review and supporting value-based purchasing for drugs covered in Medicaid, revising Medicaid drug rebate and third-party liability requirements. So as you can tell, the title of this proposed rule is pretty lengthy, as is, some of the things included in it. And just before we go to the next slide, I do want to know that the comments are due on July 20th, which is Monday. So this was a really short kind of time frame that they put out this rule. It was a 30-day comment period. So I'll make some remarks on that towards the end. So you can go to the next slide. So what's in the rule? So obviously the main part of the rule that I'm going to cover is the revisions to the Medicaid drug rebate program, which encourages these value-based purchasing arrangements. But there are a handful of other things that a lot of folks care a lot about, and there is some disagreement right now among different entities. Most notable is there's a PBM accumulator program, and so the rule makes changes to that and how the accumulator programs impact the average manufacturer price and best price. It includes how AMP is calculated by excluding the sales of authorized generics. It includes some changes to third-party liability rules. Again, that's related to the Medicaid program, some DER provisions related to opioids, and then there are some problems that folks have highlighted with several proposed new definitions related to prescription drugs formulations and line extensions. But again, I am just going to focus in on the value-based purchasing arrangement section. So you can go to next slide. Next slide. So wanted to do a quick level set before we get into what the proposed rule includes. And so just to review what VBPs are, CMS really nicely came up with a new acronym. So we had been using value-based arrangements, or VBAs. I think the OIG uses that as well. CMS now is calling them value-based purchasing arrangements, so they're calling them VBPs. Some folks call them outcomes-based contracts, OBCs. So anyways, it's kind of this whole grouping of arrangements or contracts, have you not, that really base payment on outcomes. And so how these things work, this is just a super simplified version of how these work, but on their face, it's money back guarantees for a drug. So if the drug works, you get paid, and if it doesn't work, usually the manufacturer will pay a refund back to the insurer. And there is a lot of question about, does the insurer then share some of those savings with patient groups, which I think that's a really important piece that you all should engage in on, and making sure that that's highlighted. But VBPs really start off very simply. It's a contract between a manufacturer and a payer or insurer, where they set the goals for the patient population. They define what the outcomes that they're trying to treat are. Then you get into the reporting on how are you going to collect these outcomes, how are you going to analyze them, how are you going to report them back not only to the payer and the insurer, but also to the pharmaceutical manufacturer, so that they know when payment comes due, do they owe any money back if the drug doesn't work. And so some really quick examples of some of these, with gene therapies, there's the blindness drug that's out there that they actually look at light sensitivity tests and whether or not your vision's getting better. And if it gets better, they continue to make payments. If it's not, then you get some kind of refund. There's heart attack medications that look at, did you go into the hospital for a heart attack? There's some cancer medications that look at if you reduce the tumor size. I think there's a hemophilia gene therapy coming out that will look at, are you curing hemophilia? And so there's a lot of really cool things that they can do. And what the rule does, and what CMS did for really its first time, is they kind of put their flag in the ground and said, hey, we recognize the value that these have, and that there are federal barriers standing in the way of these flourishing, again, in both the private and the public health sectors. So you can go to next slide. So within the proposed rule, there's kind of 4 big things that the rule did regarding, and I'm going to call them VBPs because that's what the rule did. So the first one was it proposes a new definition. And so it says it's an arrangement or agreement intended to align pricing and or payments to an observed or expected therapeutic or clinical value in a population, and includes both evidence-based and outcomes-based measures. So we at the council thought that definition actually encompassed a lot of different things. And so there's a lot of different ways that you can measure these, whether or not it's adherence, or it's actual, biometric data, or it's actual, different clinical data. It's A1C levels. And so this definition encompassed all of that. So we were happy with the definition. The one thing that CMS did highlight, and I think it's really important to know, is how they should interpret substantially, because when they basically denote that the VBP must have evidence-based measures or outcomes-based measures, those measures have to substantially link payment for the drug to the drug's actual performance. And CMS notes, they said, we want folks to comment in on what substantially should mean, and they're talking about, should they define it as a percentage? So should substantially be 50%? So if 50% of the drug is on the hook, or 100%, or 90%. So that's something to note that they are trying to figure out. We've talked to a whole bunch of folks on kind of where they are in that. I'm happy to talk to folks offline. I can tell you the council's kind of our comments on there is that we don't think that you should define substantially in regulations, just because it gets tricky when you put numbers that are hard to fix. And so we really kind of, I think, are of the mind that the two entities, so the insurers and the pharmaceutical manufacturers and perhaps the patient group, should be able to define whether or not, or determine whether or not they think that the drug should move forward. Next slide. So these are the three big things, additional three things that the rule proposes. So one is it proposes that value-based payment arrangement should qualify as bundled sales if the arrangement contains performance requirements. So this really means that the way that the VBPs work is, let's say you have a patient population of 100, and 99 of the patients it works perfectly, but in one patient the drug didn't work as they thought, and so usually that drug that's where they give the discount. And so for that one non-responder, the drug gets discounted down, let's say just 100%, so it's free. In Medicaid, what that means is that that's the lowest or best price available for that drug in the entire market. And so that means that they would then have to provide $0 to the entire Medicaid program. And what this bundled sale provision means is if manufacturers use kind of bundled sales, so they will sell a bunch of drugs to, insurer, they would kind of discount or spread the discount over that whole bundle. And so it smooths it out, so it's not just $0, it's the 0 plus the 99 of the 100%. And so whatever that averages out, it kind of it helps to not be as alarming as like just a one non-responder could be. The note that I want to make here with this is that, and specifically for you all, is orphan drugs and likely gene therapies will not be able to take advantage of this provision, just because of the inherent nature of bundled sale, which means you were going to sell a lot of drugs. And so rare disease and orphan drugs, obviously, you don't sell a lot of them. And so you might only have 1 or 2 patients that are on that drug within a payer population. So this, might not work for a lot of folks. The third kind of thing that it does, and of course this is the most complicated and I had the least amount of text here, is that the rule proposes a really new kind of interesting idea about allowing multiple best prices for a single drug. And so what I was talking about earlier was when you have a drug and you have a non-responder, and it means that that drug, it's $0. Well, what this is saying is that they would report the $0 for that one non-responder, but then they would also report the other price for all of the responders. The problem in the rule was that CMS, I don't think, fully thought through or fully explored the implications of this. And so a lot of folks, us included, have a lot of questions just about the workability around this. I think folks are really interested in trying to make this work, but there's just a lot of questions about, if you have a patient in the public sector and it doesn't work, what does that mean for the Medicaid program? Also, what about Medicaid programs, the ones that use managed care versus non-managed care? How does this affect other government pricing structures? How is CMS actually going to track all this data? They're reporting computer systems aren't the most modern. And so a lot of folks are just writing in more questions, and I think the general consensus is that they'd like CMS to come out with additional detail around this proposal. And then the fourth kind of bigger thing that the proposed rule does is it allows manufacturers to extend their reporting requirements outside of the 1 year to 3 years. And so you can collect outcomes data and report and change your price based on, longer longitudinal time. Next slide. So what's next? And I know I went through this really quickly. It's a pretty complicated rule. But the first thing just to know, I kind of said in the beginning, is that this proposed rule only had a 30-day comment period. If you look at the political calendar, that was probably done on purpose. There's this little thing happening in November, and some folks want to run on some stuff. And so, the proposed rule, and then they have got to review the comments, and then they want to put out an interim final or even a final. And so if you look and kind of backdate the calendar, that kind of they're trying to get this done before the election is what it looks like. And so that's just something to note. The other thing I want to note is that there might be legal challenges to this rule. The way CMS proposed changing this Medicaid best price was a loophole. And so if folks aren't happy, they might challenge CMS, which would make this a much longer drawn out process. And then our kind of opinion is, while we are so excited that CMS is recognizing the value of value-based payment arrangements and really looking at trying to work on these, we still think that you need legislation to more clearly kind of lay out some of these rules. And CMS missed a couple of things as well that we, you know, or folks are having problems with in the private sector, most notably the anti-kickback statute. And so that still needs to be taken care of. So we'll still be working on legislation. I know a lot of you have been working with me through the campaign for transformative therapies. And so, you know, just stay tuned and we'll keep you guys updated there. And then I think next slide. And that's it. And that's my COVID goodbye.
Great. Thank you so much.
Shannon, before
Yes,
you
Annie.
move off this topic, I just want to recognize CHC for your leadership on this area. I know there are a lot of stakeholders in this space, but you guys have done a lot of really fantastic work around value-based payment arrangements, or whatever, you know, the verbiage we're using is. But thank you for really your leadership in this area and ensuring that the perspectives of the patient community are really reflected into all of the conversations, because this really gets weedy really quickly, and we're really grateful to you. So thank you, Sloan, and your team for all the work that you're doing on behalf of all of us.
Great. Thank you guys, and look forward to continue working with you all on this.
Absolutely.
Great.
And then just to let people know also that Every Life is submitting comments on this proposal or the proposed rule, and we'll be submitting them probably later today. We will push them out so people can see them, so that if you're working on your own comments also, we encourage you to, you can take our comments, use them to consider them. I know National Health Council has also put out some comments. So if this is something you're looking to engage in, please look at other models that are out there as you're putting your comments together. Thanks.
Great. Thank you to both of you. Josh is our final speaker besides my quick reminders at the end. So I will hand it over to Josh.
I'm going to try to make you all nuclear medicine experts in the next 5 minutes or so. So thank you for sticking with me. I would like to talk about reimbursement for advanced radiopharmaceuticals, which there's a current bill, HR 3772 up. I'm Josh Mailman. I'm with Norcal Carcinet Community. We're a rare disease of neuroendocrine tumors. Next slide. So this is our agenda real quick. We're going to talk a little bit about nuclear medicine for you, give you a little bit about what the challenges are, the problem, what we've been doing, and what we can do for advocacy on the Hill. Next slide. So, you know, we don't do a lot of nuclear medicine, or we do a ton of nuclear medicine, and we really don't know how much we do. About 55,000 nuclear medicine imaging scans are done daily in the United States. Mostly diagnostic radiopharmaceuticals, whether this is for heart disease or other things, but more and more for rare diseases. Next slide. So in 2003, what happened is Congress designated radiopharmaceuticals as a drug, but in 2008, CMS decided to bundle them as a diagnostic area or diagnostic supply. Next slide. So what the challenge of that meant was that all of a sudden these drugs, which are approved as drugs, especially new drugs, got bundled in as supplies like water. So that for one particular type of imaging study, a center, an outpatient clinic would be paid a bundled price. There's about 5 different bundled prices in the United States for that CMS Medicare pays. The most expensive is about $1,400. One of the challenges are that these new diagnostics, especially for the rare population, smaller patient populations, might cost just the diagnostic agent about $3,000. And so any center that was doing advanced imaging was losing money after this 3-year pass-through. The CMS would pay for the drug for 3 years and then pay for it as part of a supply after the 3 years. I've written extensively on this. You can see an article that I've written on the Hill about the Hill thing, about the bill, bit.ly 3772 Hill, and also a page on our site about this. Next slide, please. So there is a coalition of industry medical societies, whether it's the Council on Radionuclide Radiopharmaceutical Therapies, the SNMMI, of which I'm a member of the Patient Advocacy Advisory Board, and MIDA, who have been looking at how to do this. And we've been doing stuff to try to get this taken care of. Next slide. Why this matters. So this is in neuroendocrine tumors. This is what the previous imaging modality would do. I'm now going to make you all radiologists. Which one would you rather read? The one on the right is actually what newer technology will do, and I bet each of you can spot where the actual tumors are, where the one on the left took 3 days, had more radiation, and the one on the right took less than 2 hours. Next slide. So we've gone through a bunch of work to try to bring this to the CMS to try to correct this. We've had bills on before. Next slide. We've even come down to continuing doing this, and here is the Patient Advocacy Board that's actually worked on this. You can see on the top. Next slide. So what we've come at is a bill because Medicare basically has not decided to address this. And so we've worked on a bill that would allow Medicare to pay the same amount for imaging, but actually rejigger it so that of those 55,000 daily imaging things, some of them get paid slightly less, so there's a pool of money for new imaging agents that are over $500. Next slide. This is a budget neutral because that's really important when talking to a bill. It holds the patient harmless. Next slide. The bill's still in committee. We have bipartisan supporters. We have 40 supporting organizations. Next slide. Here are the current sponsors. You can take a look at them. I'm not going to read them all, but we'll go to the next slide. So where are we going forward? We have a Senate companion bill that we're working on. We're working on virtual fly-ins. We're working on grassroots letter writing campaigns and op-eds and blogs. Next slide. Really, we need your help in engaging Capitol Hill if you can. Next slide. We've started letter writing campaigns, phone calls. We have coalitions. The coalition itself is actually working on virtual fly-ins, and we can talk about that with the next slide. The letters can be found on the SNMMI website if you go to advocacy and then legislative efforts. Next slide. And if you're interested in doing a virtual fly-in or joining the society and the members, there's an address right here, hpra@smmi.org, where we can arrange to work with you on a virtual fly-in and help you with this. Again, this impacts many of us with rare disease, neuroendocrine, Alzheimer's. There are other diseases that use advanced nuclear medicine, and it also just fixes a glaring hole in the way that CMS reimburses for advanced imaging diagnostics, which allows the industry to continue innovating in this space. Next slide. So really, I think I was 45 seconds over. If you have more questions, feel free to contact me and be happy to let any of you know how you can help with this. Shannon, back to you, and thank you so much for letting Norcal Carcinet and the Patient Advocacy Board of the Society of Nuclear Medicine contribute here.
Great. Thank you so much, Josh. I appreciate you being on. I'm just going to give a few reminders on Rare Across America. We have 560 advocates who are registered to participate in meetings this August from 48 states. So we're really excited to see so many people participating this summer in the program. As you guys know, the registration is closed. If you do have any friends or family members that wish that they had registered, please have them contact myself or Caitlin. And we can still add folks onto meetings that are already scheduled. So all you have to do is contact us. And then for your meetings, to be prepared as much as possible for your meetings, you can find so many different resources on the rareacrossamerica.org website, recordings from our previous 2 webinars that we've had, and then our next webinar next week. And then all of the one-pagers for the 3 RDLA suggested legislative asks are on the website, as well as our congressional scorecards and much more. If your availability does change, please do not contact the congressional offices. Please email Caitlin at klaws@everylifefoundation.org or noah@primeadvocacy.com to let them know that you need to reschedule or cancel. And then, of course, if you have any questions, please do not hesitate to get in touch with Caitlin or I as well. And then, of course, next week is our final Rare Across America webinar. The Fast Forward for Rare webinar is on Tuesday, July 21st from 3 to 4 p.m. Eastern time. If you haven't registered, you can still do so. Just visit rareacrossamerica.org and scroll down to the register for the webinars and register at the link. And this webinar is very unique and new to our Rare Across America training. This year, you're going to receive tips and coaching from communication experts to help tell your story with impact and inspire action. There will also be a component of joining small group breakout sessions for an opportunity to practice your pitch and receive some feedback from the team. And there will be an opportunity for the advocates to submit their videos after the webinar and to receive some personalized coaching and an edited copy of your video that you can share more broadly, like on your social media channels. So it's very exciting. And we're looking forward to having as many of you join us next week on Tuesday as possible. And I think that's my final slide. We will not have a monthly webinar during the month of August because it's usually a month where DC kind of shuts down, which is a little bit ironic right now. But our next webinar will be September 10th at noon Eastern Standard Time. And if you have any particular speakers or topics that you would like to be presented, please don't hesitate to reach out to myself or Caitlin as well. And then, of course, thank you to our sponsors who made today possible. I did see one question about whether this webinar would be recorded and posted on our website. Just so everyone knows, all of our webinars are recorded and posted on our website at rareadvocates.org/webinars. So feel free to check that out, and you can find all of our webinars there. All right, well, that's it for today, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. And we will see you next time.